In the book of the prophet Isaiah, God is said to declare, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." In today's reading from First Samuel and from the Gospel of Mark, we see this theme reverberate. That these two readings have anything to do with one another, however, is little more than a happy accident. You see, over the next several months, we will be reading the Track 1 choices for the reading. In the Episcopal Church and several mainline Protestant churches, there is a choice between Track 1 and Track 2 for much of the liturgical year, especially during these times that the celebrant is wearing green and the altar and other furnishings are bedecked in green. Track 2 follows the Roman Catholic lectionary more closely and uses readings from the Old Testament that echo the themes of the Gospel readings, with the Gospel readings and the second readings roughly being a continuous reading week to week, picking up one week where you left off the previous. But in order to echo the theme of the Gospel, the Old Testament readings will skip from one book to another, crisscrossing centuries of writing and creating the impression that the Old Testament is merely a prelude to the New Testament, rather than the foundation of a great and true religion all on its own. Track 1, meanwhile, reads through the books of the Old Testament in order, skipping some of the contradictory and repetitive parts, yes, but creating a sense of continuity in the reading of the Old Testament. And so, throughout June, we will be reading from 1 Samuel, the same book that we just happened to be reading from in Bible study. And this week, by happenstance, we find that both the first reading and the gospel hold a common theme of God's logic versus human logic. But in the weeks ahead, we will often find that each reading must be read on its own, and I will not even attempt to reconcile one to the other. So that said, how do we see this theme of God's wisdom in respect to human wisdom in both the first reading and the gospel? Well, in the first reading, we have Samuel being told by the elders of Israel that they need a king, and him struggling with this notion, and God agreeing with Samuel, but nonetheless conceding to their demands. Now, for those of you who have been joining me in Bible study, this will be review. But for others, in the centuries after Moses led the people across the desert to the Holy Land, they were ruled not by kings, but rather by a kind of impromptu leader known as a judge. These judges might rule for life or for a single war. They might rule in peace time as arbitrators of disputes, or they might rule in war as generals, or they might be the high priest at a particularly prominent shrine. And they might be good, upright, and moral people, or they might be corrupt, womanizing drunkards. But the thing about the judges is that whoever they were respected personally by their society and looked for leadership. And when they died, the people were under no obligation to follow or offer any sort of deferential treatment to their children. Some were dictators for life, but when those lives ended, so did their rule. Now, Samuel was the son of Hannah, the woman to whom the canticle we have been reading in place of the Gloria at the beginning of our service is attributed. Hannah had been childless into probably her mid to late 30s or even 40s, and had all but given up on ever becoming a mother when she prayed to God and was blessed with Samuel. As he was seen as a blessing from God, Hannah dedicated him back to God, and he went to live with Eli, the priest of a shrine in northern Israel and a judge. And in the years to come, Hannah was blessed with numerous children. Meanwhile, Samuel was called by God in that beautiful, and for those of you with small children who wake up in the middle of the night to tell you something really important, somewhat humorous story in which Eli tells Samuel to say, "Here I am, Lord, your servant is listening." Over time, he usurps the rights of Eli's sons in service to God as priests and judges, and becomes known as a man who is a true voice for God amongst the people. But Samuel's sons are a bad lot, demanding bribes, overcharging for services, and promoting prostitution as an act of worship. And the people were divided, tribe against tribe, family against family. Yes, they all on some level worshiped the one God. But other than that, they were falling apart as a common people and were risking annihilation as the ancient Arabian, Persian, and Semitic peoples from the lands around them constantly invaded villages, raping, pillaging, and enslaving the inhabitants as they went. And now, the seafaring Philistines posed a new threat. The people wanted stability and unity. But instead of turning to God, trusting in God, and believing in the wisdom of God, they demanded a king. Now, God and Samuel, as God's spokesperson, understand that this is not really what they want and tried to talk them out of it, explaining what having a king really meant with words that would have made an anarchist or libertarian proud. But ultimately, God is a God of free will. God tries to pull us back from our follies that will bring only suffering and pain and separate us from God. But God will not force us to do anything. And so eventually Samuel acts to anoint Saul as king. But as we will see, Saul was a lousy king. As much as he did lead the people into battle, he was human and tended to act without thinking and then wallowed in regret. But as he was now king, to usurp him was not merely a matter of declaring someone else king, as had been done with the judges, but a matter of civil war. By defying the wisdom of God, the people brought upon themselves death and destruction. In the gospel reading, by contrast, we see this theme of the wisdom of God expressed not in a matter of national import, but rather on a very personal and domestic level. Mary was Jesus' mother, and she and Jesus' sisters and younger brothers hear that Jesus, her son, their brother, someone that has grown up in their household and been a part of their lives for 30 years, learning his father's trade and becoming a carpenter, has suddenly decided to become a holy man, a prophet, a healer. This is not normal. This is what many people would describe as crazy. And in a time and place in which engaging in loud, strange, and unconventional behavior was a good way to get yourself executed by a paranoid and self-serving totalitarian government, it was dangerous. So when Jesus' family hear about what is going on, they set off to drag Jesus home. Obviously, in their minds, he had lost his. But if they could get him home, maybe they could bring him to his senses before he got himself killed. But Jesus, the Son of God, rejected not only going home with his family, but the very notion that family should be restricted to one's biological parents and siblings. Instead, Jesus created the Jesus movement, the bedrock of the Christian faith, as a chosen family. Jesus rejected human wisdom that says we should be limited in whom we embrace as family to just our relatives, and instead embraces family, all who share our love for God and for neighbor. Human wisdom is not God's wisdom. Human wisdom says that we should live our lives focused on security, fear, and hate. God's wisdom says we need to live our lives focused on faith, hope, and love. Amen.